Once we're done with doing all the marking, which includes marking the site, which is the length of the tendon, and marking the middle line, intersection point, and the circles, and the cut lines, next thing we're doing is sawing off the access blocks. So there's a couple of ways to go about cutting a long stock like this. Since you can really clamp it on the table this way, the best way, in my opinion, is to hold the workpiece down like this at an angle. Okay, so you're basically holding the bottom of the stock down with your leg and keeping it at an angle. Since this saw cuts on the push, right, the push stroke, the forward stroke of the saw will make sure that the workpiece doesn't move out of place. So if anything, the only kind of assistance that you would need would be from a hold fast. If you bring it over and then clamp it down on the table like this, that will prevent your workpiece from moving sideways. So it would be a lot more stable like this. So of course, when you're sawing, you want to start from the corner. I'm going to get a close-up shot for this. So you want to start from the corner, and I'm going to cut all the way down to the bottom of the line here. So don't put too much pressure on the blade. Just let the saw do the work. And of course, you need to make sure that the blade does not deviate away from the line. Okay, as you can see, now I have cut it. Let me refocus. Cut it to the line there, and if you look at the top, it's almost to the other end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue cutting it until it reaches the other corner. So you'll see me moving the saw like this, different orientation, and the reason is whenever you saw something, you don't want to saw the entire surface in one go. You want to break it into cutting the back, cutting the front, and then cutting off the middle section like that. And now I've actually cut all the way to the other side, so I'll have a little bit of a starting point. As you can see, it's right next to the line as I intended. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the exact same way all the way down to the bottom from this end. Okay. All right, as you can see, my cut is complete from here to the other side. There's a little bit of material in the middle section. Don't have to worry about that. I'm gonna remove it later with the cross cut. So another way about making that exact same cut would be to bring it over the edge of the table like this. So you can either choose to clamp it down or not. I'm just gonna clamp it down for demonstration. And you're basically gonna cut the exact same thing. So start on the outside of the line, right next to it. Start slow, light strokes. Well, as you can see, I managed to cut this line and the line at the top pretty fast. So this is another way of holding the workpiece. I won't say another way of another technique of cutting, because I basically use the same technique because that's my my preferred technique, and also I think it's the correct way. I could be wrong, but it's worked for me so far, and I just want to cover that. You can also hold the workpiece down with your leg, or you can actually sit on it as you saw. All right, and we are done. And the reason I mentioned I prefer to hold the material the other way is because I don't have to lean over and check the cut. And I can easily move the workpiece around, shift the workpiece around slightly easier compared to having to, unclamp this on and off. But of course, try out both techniques. I would recommend trying out both techniques or both ways, and then stick with the one that works the best for you. All right. So if you followed the previous instruction correctly so far, you'll end up with this cut here. As you can see, there's a small square in the middle, and we need to get rid of the excess part, the waste part on the side. Okay, so we are going to be doing a cross cut now, and the reason it's called a cross cut is because we are cutting across the direction of the grain. So the direction of the grain for this piece would be going down like this, and then we're cutting across. Okay, so you can actually practice on this waist if you've never done this before. Start slow from the front. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. Cross cut is much easier than doing a rip cut, so if you've done the previous cuts, it should be slightly easier. Start right next to the line. I prefer to start right outside the line instead of starting on the line. So start with the pull stroke just to give it that initial groove, and then start pushing slowly, gently, and then go all the way to the back. So of course you want to make sure you don't go over the line, otherwise you would end up cutting into the joint. A tiny bit is fine, but if you cut too much, then you could make the joinery or the joint itself a bit weak. So cutting off the grain from the side, doing another rip cut. And then you should be able to lift it up just like that. Okay, so I'm going to continue that all the way around. All right, there you go. So that's how you cut the waist off. And as you can see, we will be left with a square tenon. Okay, for the next step, after sawing off the waist, is we are going to clean up the corners. As you can see, some of the corners, there's a little bit of material left. And for that, we are going to use a chisel. So with the package, you will receive two different sizes of chisel. One is 15 and the other one is 10. We're going to get started with the 15 because it covers more surface. Okay, so when you use a chisel, please be careful not to cut yourself, not to cut your own fingers. And in a flat chisel, you have a flat surface on one side, and on the flip side, you have a bevel side. And this right here is the cutting edge. Okay, so I polished the chisel before we get started just now, so it should be really sharp. All right, so when you use a chisel, you want to hold it from the metal so that when you're chopping, you have more control of the chisel. Okay, you want to make sure the flat side of the chisel is resting flat on the shoulder here. Okay, just chop it down. Oops, sorry about that. Maybe I have to move it a little bit. chop it down. Another one here. One more time. And bring it around. Keep the chisel flat on the surface. Just use the edge of the chisel to shave it away. Okay, so whenever you're chiseling, make sure your fingers are nowhere near in front of where the chisel is going. Okay, same thing here. Then the next step is paring. Keep the chisel flat on the surface, and then use the corner of the chisel, and then push forward slowly at a 45-degree angle, or you can also push straight down like this. Alright, so now if you look at the corners, they're much cleaner. So next step after this would be to start carving our tannins round. So before we can do that, we need to mark the middle of our round shape. These lines don't have to be perfectly straight. You just want to have some sort of indication that would show you, where the center is supposed to be. Right after we're done cleaning up the corners and drawing out the center of our circle, you have two ways of going about this. The first one is to just carve out the cylindrical shape, the round shape of our tannin, or the second one is to start carving the legs. Because to carve the legs we use hand plane, which is slightly easier to control as opposed to using a chisel. So if you want to learn how to carve square pieces round, you might want to skip to the video about spindle leg carving and tapering, and then you can come back and carve this away later. One other important thing that I want to cover before we continue is right when you saw off the excess, you'll end up with a lot of these scraps. So don't throw them away. You can keep them, you can save them for later, so they can be reused as our wedge. So I'll show you how to carve a wedge using these offcuts. Okay, so save these scraps, don't throw them away. So as I was saying, to turn any square piece into a round shape, what you need to do is get rid of the corners. So I'm gonna try chopping off the corners using a chisel. So you definitely want to start small. Take out a little bit here. So when you're chopping like this, make sure you hold it a little bit further back, because you kind of want to have a nice handle of the chisel. And then slowly chisel down. And now I'm very close to the line. So as you can see, I use 3 separate cuts to get down to the line. You can definitely try doing that in one go, but you might run into a problem of overcutting, which is not very good. So another way of cutting off these corners would be to use a handsaw, and I would only use a handsaw when it's absolutely necessary, because chisel is just much easier and faster. didn't chip the chisel. So whenever you drop the chisel, please be careful. First off, don't drop it on your foot. Second off, make sure you don't lose any of the you don't chip away the edge, otherwise you'll have to resharpen it, which will take you a longer time. Okay, now I'm done with 2 corners. As you can see, it's super fast. So the next step would be to bring the remaining corners or the edges down. So we're going to flatten them and then slowly bring them down to a circle shape. First thing, you might want to clamp it down. Next thing, we're just going to be using this 15mm flat chisel again. So you're going to be holding the chisel from the handle like this, and for me, what I usually like to do is put my index at the bottom of the chisel and the thumb on top of the bevel. So you're going to be paring the edges down. Just go straight to the corner. They should chip away. If they don't, just go in from the corner, just give it a chop. Let's do the other one. Same thing, you want to bring a little bit at a time. So you can either pare it straight down like this, or you can use a slice and cut, which is basically paring at an angle. So it will take out a finer cut. I use that paring, I use a slice and cut mostly when I encounter interlocking grain, where the grain or the wood just won't come off. If I go straight, then I'll have to try a different technique. Remember, you are going down to the circle line, right? Try not to go over that. And just chisel straight. So first thing, you're looking at the line, and second thing, you're looking, you're feeling for the ridges. So you're basically cutting away the ridges. The more ridges there are, the more uneven it is. So it's all nice and round here. I'm going to turn it around. Repeat the same process. Boom, boom, boom. Careful of the way you hold the chisel. So in this case, just come around from the corners. Chop it down like that. Okay, now I've carved the tenon, this round tenon, down to 30mm from the top to the bottom. So if we grab our caliper, check the bottom, should be 30 right there, and the top should also be 30. And the same all the way across. All right, so yeah, that's how you do a straight tenon. And for those of you that decides to use straight tenon for the joinery, this is where you would end up with. And then you just have to do the same for the remaining 3 legs. And of course, your tenon size might be different. So right now mine is 30, so yours could be slightly smaller, like 20. Okay, and yeah, that's about it. So next up, we are going to taper this, right? So how do we taper this? So it depends on the taper that you're going for. I'm going to go for 20mm at the top to 30mm at the bottom. So since we have the 30mm, since we've carved out the 30mm, what I'm going to do is draw out 20 here. Okay, since we are tapering this end to 20, first thing we're going to do is whittle it down to that inside circle. Start from any side, so it would just be like sharpening a pencil. Take out a little bit at a time. Corner, take out the corner, and then take out the other corner first, and take out the middle. So it's called cornering and leveling. Again, you want to keep your fingers at the back so that they will be out of the way. And remember, you're only carving the front, let's say, 20 millimeter, about 20 millimeter. You're only shaving away the top 20 millimeter first. Okay, so, and I'm only working on one side because it's easier to focus. And I'm going to be shaving this down until I get to the line. So if you have a sharp chisel, this step would be much easier. Okay, I'm right outside the line here, so I'm going to continue the same thing for the remaining 3 sides. So the right technique to whittling is to hold the chisel once again from the back, and you're using your thumb mostly, your left thumb, and you're pushing it with your thumb, with your left thumb. Not so much with your right hand, even though it's still pushing a little bit, but you're guiding it with your left thumb. Push with your right hand, guide with your left thumb. Okay. So to get the taper that we want, all we have to do is remove the material in the middle, so you can actually visibly see the bump right in the middle. Right, so right after we remove this, this bump here will move back, so it will get smaller and smaller until we get to a point where we can see a straight line from the back to the front. Okay, so I'm going to start chiseling. Just going to start paring. Try paring straight, try paring sideways, a slicing cut. Try all the cuts that you can, but remember, you're only taking out the highest spot first. Remember, only take out from the middle. As you can see, in about 2 minutes I managed to flatten the whole side down. So let's check if I put the chisel like this, and then it doesn't rock. So right now it rocks a little bit, so there's a bit to be taken out from the middle, from the front part here. Let's check again. Now it's flat, so we know that the taper is done. Okay, so I'll be doing the same thing on other sides. Okay, so now we have carved the tenon. So the top of the joint is 20 millimeter, and the bottom of the taper is 30 millimeter. As you can see, it's all straight and flat. Let's check the measurement real quick. So you can see it reads 20 right there, and at the bottom it should read 29 to 30. Alright, so now we are ready to move on to our next step, which is going to be carving the legs.